Hi, everybody. Welcome. I'm so glad to see such a full house today. This is excellent. What a great turnout. Not surprising because of these two amazing poets. Hi, everyone. My name is Jennifer Franklin, and I'm the program director of the Hudson Valley Writers Center. I'm so happy to have you with us today for this in-person reading with Mary Jo Bang and Rowan Ricardo Phillips. If this is your first time joining us for a reading, welcome. We hope you continue to come to our online readings, classes, and events. Please check out our website for the complete list of offerings in person and on Zoom. We hope you'll return to the Hudson Valley Writers Center in person as we welcome Sandra Newman and Ed Park, two amazing novelists, on Saturday, May 18th. Please save the date for our Hudson Valley Writers Center Gala on Friday, September 20th, and it will be right here at the Hudson Valley Writers Center. I want to thank the board, our teachers, and our students who are the beating heart of the center. We also want to recognize all the foundations and organizations who support us, including the Bydale Foundation, the David G. Taft Foundation, NISCA, and Arts Westchester. I also want to thank my colleagues, Sophia Bannister and Leslie Zinna, who are here with us today, and Misty Yarnell and Christina Papadopoulos for all their hard work. So today, Jennifer is here from the Village Bookstore in Pleasantville, and we hope that you will buy the books from the readers. Part of the reason why our reading series is completely free is so that you'll hopefully buy the books. Rowan Ricardo Phillips is the author of 7 previous books of poetry, prose, and translation. His most recent collection of poems is Silver. The recipient of a Whiting Award, a Guggenheim Fellowship, the Ansfield Wolf Book Award, the Penn ESPN Award for Literary Sports Writing, the Nicholas Gillian Outstanding Book Award, the Penn Joyce Osterweil Award, and the GLCA New Writers Award. He has been a finalist for the Griffin International Poetry Prize, the Los Angeles Times Book Award for Poetry, and an NAACP Image Award. He has also been longlisted for the National Book Award for Poetry. He is a distinguished professor of English at Stony Brook, and he is the poetry editor of the New Republic. His book in progress, I Just Want Them to Remember Me, Black Baseball in America, will be published by FSG in 2025, so look out for that. He lives in New York City and Barcelona. It is such an honor to welcome Rowan Ricardo Phillips back to the Hudson Valley Writers Center. Several years before the pandemic, he taught a few sold-out sessions of our popular Monday night poetry class in person at the Hudson Valley Writers Center, making the trek up to Sleepy Hollow from the Upper East Side, where coincidentally we lived across the street from each other. But the important connection we share is that we were both lucky enough to be mentored by the amazing Michael S. Harper at Brown. We were recipients of his humble, generous teaching. And as Rowan's students will attest, Rowan carries forth that beautiful legacy in his own teaching. Rowan has read several times before at the center, and each time he has brought the house down with his powerful sets. The team at FSG writes about Silver. This beautiful, slender collection is Rowan Ricardo Phillips at his very best. These luminous, unsparing, dreamlike poems are as lyrical as they are virtuosic. Not the meaning, Phillips writes, but the meaningfulness of this mystery we call life powers these poems. Silver reimagines blank verse, elegy, terza rima, rhyme royale, translation, and rap with such extraordinary vision and alluring strangeness that they sound irrepressibly fresh and vibrant. Publishers Weekly says, musical and erudite, the latest from Phillips offers an extended ars poetica in which poetry is a, quote, ritual that the sun organizes and arranges. In my opinion, A.E. Stallings and Rowan Ricardo Phillips have the best poetic ears of anyone writing today. The music of their language is heady, intoxicating, and intelligent, but never sacrifices meaning for the pleasure of their words, which is a rare and difficult task. Listen to the end of Rowan Tree that contains the book's title. Quote, that's when in the great silver apogee of night, I stepped out into the warm air and stripped the rowan that had been growing there bare until it was barely there, roots crowning its nadir, and everywhere, crowing, beware, beware. Please, all of you, help me welcome Rowan Ricardo Phillips.
That's kind of you. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much, Jennifer, for your very kind words. And all of the staff here at the Hudson Valley Writers Center. Thank you all for coming. Alan, wonderful poets in the audience. I'm going to keep this short and sweet. I'm a minimalist at heart. This book, Silver, is framed by two poems with the same title. They're both called The First and Final Poem is The Sun. I consider the book to be a type of mood or temperament. And so it has a frame that marks kind of the observable edges of its universe. And what's in between is immersion into the crazy world of my poems. Okay, so these first two poems are the first and final poems of the collection. And they are called The First and Final Poem is The Sun. The first and final poem is The Sun, which means that poetry is a ritual that the sun organizes and arranges. But aside from the other is the singular essential thing, and is one thing among billions upon billions of things just like it, is known by a name which is not its true name, and so scours the earth in search of what may have been in the beginning of things and may still be in the end, when time, that invention of the mind, finally reveals not the meaning, but the meaningfulness of this mystery we call life. The first and final poem is The Sun. Not the meaning, but the meaningfulness of this mystery we call life. When time, that invention of the mind, finally reveals what it may have been in the beginning of things and may still be in the end. And so scours the earth in search of what is known by a name which is not its true name, and is one thing among billions of things just like it. And aside from the other is the singular essential thing, which means that poetry is a ritual that the sun organizes and arranges. The first and final poem is The Sun. Thank you. Paradise Lost. This began as I like their contemporary artists who kind of dig in the crates. I like to call it kind of going back into material of the past and reimagining it as, what if this were contemporary impulse that I had to make now? So for instance, the pianist Vikingur Olafsson's takes on Bach's catalog, or Max Richter's recent rewriting, if you will, reconsideration of Vivaldi's Four Seasons. I was doing something similar, I say humbly, with Paradise Lost, which is a text that I love. But you also dive into it, and you should be asking yourself questions of, amidst all of the majesty in this, if I were writing this, what do I believe in? How much would I keep? And I was writing it in pentameter and everything like that, and taking things out and everything like that. And I was showing it to my editor, Jonathan Galassi, and every time I would show it to him and it would look like Paradise Lost, he'd say, go weirder, weirder, weirder. I appreciate him for always asking me to be stranger, because I'm already pretty strange as it is. But this is what I settled on. I don't usually preface poems. None of my books have any notes in them, but we're kind of together in this kind of tight, rainy community. So a couple of things. I mentioned a color, a verb, a mineral, a metal, and then after tattooed angels and their electric data. And those are basically just allegories for the evolution of American music. So for instance, the color is the blues, the verb is jazz, the mineral is rock, the metal is heavy metal, and after that, electronic music. And then I guess finally, if you ever have the opportunity to see Melville's copy of Paradise Lost, I would really recommend it. Princeton's Rare Books and Manuscripts have it. But, as you may recall in book one, Milton humbly says, he's attempting something that's never before been attempted in prose or rhyme. And Melville angrily writes in the margins there, Tasso, exclamation point, because Tasso, of course, did previously attempt this rather wonderfully in rhyme. So I recommend Tasso to you. Paradise Lost. I start with sorrow, then feign joy in the rhythm method. I do dark things lightly and light things darkly. Opening my front door, I find the world in flames, our tree frozen into rictus, and the front door gone. But then I listen for that color, that verb, that mineral, that metal. And after, the electric data of tattooed angels dancing on air. Hadn't it all been something else before? Something else, somewhere else to someone else before? Could be. Could be. But the trick, you see, is to say that this has never been done before. That it simply sprung up from some uninhabited space. This epic of epics, this American song. Rowan tree. I strongly recommend to all of you to write a poem about your name if you ever feel blocked, right? Writer's block, you should definitely write your name. And if you think you have a very boring and plain name, then you should definitely be writing about your name. Rowan tree. This time I got everything wrong again. The tree, it was red and the sky was gray. Tomorrow ran off with today. I'd swallow time just so I could get things right. I was a present to myself, went right past it. I called myself it and sat with it, sad with it, and yet couldn't find the lie in it. It suited me to a T. Without it, who would I be? I was so tired, but scared to say it. Knowing what tends to come after, I zipped it. I parabolaed between parables, playing Bach's Concerto D minor BWV 974 for the deep despair in it before it falls toward the solution of its final chord. That's when, in the great silver apogee of night, I stepped out into the warm air and stripped the rowan that had been growing there bare, until it was barely there, roots crowning its nadir, and everywhere crowing, beware, beware. The triumph of song. I mean, the only zone I think I might know, and by know, I mean this thing hasn't quite killed me yet, is the triumph of song. All my poems mean that, I think, really. This is the edge of my observable universe. I can't see what doesn't sing or what I haven't coaxed from some notes out of air. Like the first time I must have heard Strawberry Fields Forever. I was 12 and cupped the soft black sponges to my ears while sitting cross-legged on a friend's twin bed as the janky copy of the cassette copied over my memory of where I was, whom I was with, and even who I was. All I remember is the song, all that confident lack of confidence, which is what writing poems is really like. The dark blood zoning forwards and backwards in the brain, the heart like grass in a bowl, and the burning horizon's sharp swagger, all of it, part physics, part faith, part void. There is a really wonderful Argentine folk singer, guitarist. He's no longer with us, but his name was and is Atahualpa Yupanqui. I really highly recommend him to you all, or even if you all like music. I've actually made a little playlist for this book. It's got like lots of songs and artists that are mentioned in it, or things that I was listening to when I wrote it. So whether you have Apple Music or Spotify, if you enter my name in silver, it should pop up. This is called Atahualpa Yupanqui. Some of his songs are there. Me está sobrando guitarra, Guitarra dímelo tú, El Poeta. Highly recommended. Atahualpa Yupanqui. 1. Blue papa of the cosmic canticles that the moistened plums sing to throbbing stars. Stay a while. It's only morning. The larks are still asleep inside your old guitars. They dream the double dream of free harvests from a free land far, so far out of view. Can you see it? Guitarra, dímelo tú. 2. Once I rode my horse into the center of the city, and a great silence grew deep inside of me. A burning ember dwindling down to cinder, but I knew this silence was not a yes or a no. And as I'm no poet, there are so few. Did I dream you? Guitarra, dímelo tú. 3. Come stitch the night back together again, Don Ata, double God, with your single string of bass. The one all the quiet pain comes easily to. Or so it seems in the wide spectrum of your 6 silver strings. 5 for what's truthful, and 1 for what's true. And which am I? Guitarra, dímelo tú. This poem is called Key West. It's for Billy Collins. We were in Key West 2 years ago, and I saw him scribble on a notebook, Yacht Rock. And I thought, what an awesome title for a Billy Collins book, Yacht Rock. It turns out he didn't know the phrase, and that's why he wrote it down. And so we started talking about Yacht Rock and poetry, like we usually do. But one of the funny things about being in Key West is it's hard not to think about Stevens and the idea of order at Key West. And how that poem, if you're familiar with Key West at all, has a bit of a geographical lie in it. You can't turn from the port. You can't turn from the ocean and have the port behind you. It's poetic license. And I like that a poem that seems so with its boots on the ground, even though it's thinking about the imagination completely, remakes the place. So between talking about that and Yacht Rock, which I love, who doesn't yet love a little bit of Christopher Cross and, Doobie Brothers and all that type of stuff, it still hits in the right moments, right? So Key West. Remembering that little trick of light in the idea of order at Key West. When we turn from the singing at the shore, shine-minded, ponderous, and raw, to find there in its debonair the distant port, not a mile off now, but right here. high on nocturne and brine, biding its time in the muddy waters of distortion that flood Key West till everything has happened and nothing that has happened will. Like the apocryphal songs of yacht rock, which mean nothing to you until they do. Okay, I think I'm going to read 3 more poems. The first one, there are 2 poems in this collection which follow a process whereby I take the last word line by line of a pre-existing poem and use them to write a new poem. One of the poems is based on Tintern Abbey, which I won't read now, but that's Child of Nature. But this poem called The Stolen Note takes the last word of each line of Seamus Heaney's The Given Note, which is a wonderful poem, really about kind of like the mythopoetic origins of Irish song, right? And the idea that a violinist way out in the Blasket Islands, those trailing islands, Irish islands that go out into the Atlantic, that the music came to him off of the air and found its way to his violin. And that's where kind of the great foundations of Irish music come from. And I find myself thinking often about the origins of creation and song and sound for the African diaspora, which is not mythopoetic, but rather caught up in other types of terrible encounters, which make mythopoetic creation a bit more messy. So if, Seamus's poem is set out in the Blasket Islands, The Stolen Note is set on the northernmost tip of the Isthmus of Luanda in Angola, and on the horizon is one of the first slave ships. But actually, before I give you The Stolen Note, maybe I should give you The Given Note, so you could kind of like hear it and have a sense of how the poems are in relation and in harmony. Let me see. The Given Note. On the most westerly Blasket, in a dry stone hut, he got this air out of the night. Strange noises were heard by others who followed. Bits of a tune coming in on loud weather, though nothing like melody. He blamed their fingers and ear as unpracticed, their fiddling easy, for he had gone alone out onto the island and brought back the whole thing. The house throbbed like his full violin. So whether he calls it spirit music or not, I don't care. He took it out of wind, off mid-Atlantic. Still, he maintains, from nowhere. It comes off the bow gravely, rephrases itself into the air. The Stolen Note. Ocean exposed like the smallest Blasket. Luanda's isthmus, a northernmost hut, and a sail staring out at it through the night. They knew that was no crescent moon, had heard of others dragged into the white, their tune silver as shark and sword and loud weather, as much oblique code as a melody. There was no preparing for it. An ear either knew it or not, nothing easy, a continent turned into an island turned into pain. Take this thing, they heard. This is your first violin. So whether they called it sacred music or not, I don't know if I care. Here it was, the ancient modern mid-Atlantic song of a somewhere turned into nowhere. And nowhere to hide, they listened gravely as an iron note inched closer on air. And I'll conclude with two poems, or kind of a double engine. I guess it's a double elegy. The first one is called Prelude. The second one is called Postlude. Prelude. 1. My grandmother saw it coming and left. I'd already left. It came late and swift, like a tidal wave mistaken for a wave. Came not as a note, but as an octave, black-keyed and mangled, searching the hospice only to find she'd left without notice. The soul clapped from her body, masked by death, death hiding death from death, and finding no sign of her in the high cheekbones or skin, strode out on a cough into the evening. 2. In the weeks between her death and being laid to rest, life became COVID-19. Both the living and the dead shared one air. Then the service came, and I was not there. I watched from the safe distance of an app as my mother and uncle, massed among the massed few in a pewless space, made peace with the orphans who'd come to take their place. Looking at them on screen was like looking at the world through the bars of a cage. 3. And now, high on a slope near Van Cortlandt, the immortelles of perfect pitch sing Ina Harris to sleep. Her shade goes there to listen, bathed in the scent of ilex, palm, linden, kapok. It is Easter, and she is dressed in her lilac vest and hat her daughter crossed bridge and Bronx and plague to bring to her. She is 2 steps ahead of this pentameter as it follows her through the flexed valley of the shadow of death. This elegy, which, like all of them, is so useless and late. My grandmother saw it coming, and she left. Postlude. Her hospital bed, her favorite red gown, the one embroidered with small purple and gold flowers trellising the unknown infection riddling every inch of her. Her hair brushed back but not braided today. The lunch tray remaindered to a corner. Plastic pudding cup, nectarine, jaded pillbox, all hollowed out. Verbless, she sang, didn't sing, and sang as she crossfaded to an invisible dimension seen only on the back of her winced lids. The flowers sitting on the windowsill, those photos pinned to the wall. The turquoise vase, the unused frames, suddenly they seemed important. Where would they all go? I surprised myself that just for a second, I deemed those things to be of value in themselves, all that flared bric-a-brac, and felt ashamed. I held her hand in search of some resolve, but as her hand trembled, my hand trembled. I was bad at this. I wanted to prove that I wasn't. My mind reassembled and for a moment shut down. I joined her where Charon sat at a makeshift table, killing time with his dog in the foyer, playing dominoes by himself, waiting under the faint spectral light of a coy star. She was there only in the most craven sense of the word there, as when someone says, I'll be there soon, when they're still in New Haven. She squeezed my hand and whistled from the strain. I rubbed her hand with my free hand, then kissed it, and then kissed her warm forehead again as I pried my hand from her grip and missed my last chance not to have done that. I looked at the time and saw I had a minute left. Then, after having done all the math, took a deep breath I can never take back. Far away was a better me who would chant, she saw it coming, so she left. But my car was waiting downstairs, silver and fine free. So I left. The rental purred when I turned it on. And just like that, she was gone. Muchas gracias. Thank you very much.
Wow. That was so moving, Rowan. Thank you so much for that reading. Mary Jo Bang is the author of 9 books of poems, most recently a film in which I play everyone, published in September from Graywolf. It is a finalist right now for the Lambda Literary Award for Bisexual Poetry. Her other books have received the National Book Critics Circle Award, the Bakeless Prize, the Poetry Society of America's M.F.A di Castagnola Award for Manuscript-in-Progress, among many others. She was poetry co-editor at Boston Review from 1995 to 2005. She has been the recipient of a Hodder Fellowship from Princeton, a grant from the Guggenheim Foundation, and a Berlin Prize Fellowship at the American Academy in Berlin. She has a BA and MA in sociology from Northwestern University, a BA in photography from the Polytechnic of Central London, and an M.F.A in creative writing from Columbia University School of the Arts. She's also translated all 3 books of Dante's Divine Comedy to critical acclaim. It is a true honor for me to introduce these 2 poets today. In a time where poetry is sometimes reduced to sound bites and social media tiles, these 2 poets have remained serious and dedicated to their craft. Both of them are 2 of my favorite writers. This is the first time Mary Jo has read at the Hudson Valley Writers Center in the nearly 11 years that I've been program director here. I'm very grateful that she made this trip from St. Louis to read for us, especially since she will be back in Brooklyn reading with John Murillo for the PSA reading series on May 23rd. I was lucky enough to be a year behind Mary Jo when we were graduate students at Columbia's M.F.A program in the mid-90s. We took Lucy Bruck-Broido's summer workshop together in June of 2005, and I had a first row seat to the magnificence of her burgeoning craft. She mentored me when she was poetry editor of Columbia, a journal of literature and the arts, and when she graduated and trusted me with that job. I have watched with admiration, but never surprise, as she became one of the most significant poets of her generation. A film in which I play everyone has been a widely reviewed collection. Much has been made about the point of view of the collection, taking a directorial stance. In her thoughtful review of the collection in the New York Times Book Review, Eliza Gabbert writes, Mary Jo Bang assumes the view of an angel perched a little above the action. Each poem feels like a scene from a life reenacted on a dollhouse movie set, a scaled-down world. This is true, but at the same time, I would argue that unlike the world cast in artificial miniature, these poems thrum with a life and a constant awareness of death. We are all dying, but some more than most, she writes. So says my interiority. It talks to me as green fills the screen. It takes my arm and walks alongside me. I never ask where I'm going. I know I'm not meant to arrive. Please, everyone, help me welcome Mary Jo Bang.
I'm setting this timer. Yeah. Thank you, Jennifer. Yeah, it's there are those connections one makes as a student that just keep going, and even though you lose sight occasionally of each other, you come back into view, and Jennifer is that person, and I'm just so happy, and I'm happy for her recent books, When a God Shakes Your House, and a new book coming when? Someday. Okay. Soon. Thank you for inviting me. Thanks to Sophia and Leslie. Thanks to everyone who makes this event happen. And thank you all for coming, and particularly those who came to the class and entrusted me with their works. So this first poem is for Lucy Brock-Burdo, our teacher who's just been mentioned. The Echo. The transient snow in a shaken globe was making me think of the Moscovian dome, below which, in a small private room called a cubiculum, I'd read that they had buried an empress's golden hair after she'd died, after they inquired eagerly for the Tsarina, but she was nowhere to be found, from the remotest periods to the present time. Snow becomes rain under the overhead rainforest showerhead, drip by imbecilic drip, dripping onto a broken stone floor. About the absolute fracture that death represents, my brain believes in what I believe. Like any animal, we make our way. Amphibian, reptilian, mammalian. Some days more than others, I put away one moment and up comes another, a replenishing gold Virgilian bough. Outside, snow engulfs the asphalt, the sidewalks, the drivers. In a second, it seems, a million trains enter and exit the tunnel. The flood protective walls rise, a tower of torn eaves over a storm-drenched oubliette. The dome dissolves, leaving only the ineffable portion of this time and the idea that we who are still here have kept what was left of her. Hanging the curtain. The curtain was meant to hide the zoo of my petty vices, but instead it was a coat that kept falling off my shoulders, revealing a watch that kept adding up the hours. After finishing my shift, I sat with a pill in my hand, then thought better of it and dropped it back into its plastic. In the family album, I stood at the edge, a dented girl with a divided mind. Daily, the same awareness. It was only a matter of time before someone would act with cruelty. Now looking back, I see, will you, won't you join the dance, as the ever-pestering question. In the side yard, 6 rabbits in a cage, lettuce torn to bits, silent rats consorting with rusting tin cans at the bottom of the drainage ditch, occasional victims of a stepfather's shotgun. Once a year, fireworks sounded the night out. A weeping shrub occupied the corner yard, the flowering branches bent like water falling from an active fountain. When I hit my limit, I crawled under it to escape the conceptual blur. I have to have a drink of water. When I was teaching just today, I took a swallow of that and had a coughing fit. So hope that doesn't happen again, ever, but especially today. You don't want to be doing that all the time. Okay, I'm going to read the title poem. The title poem and the title of the book, A Film in Which I Play Everyone, came from a quote I read by David Bowie. And he said, and this was in response to a fan asking him if he had any film roles coming up. He said, I'm looking for backing for an unauthorized autobiography that I'm writing. Hopefully, this will sell in such huge numbers that I will be able to sue myself for an extraordinary amount of money and finance the film version in which I will play everybody. So when I read that, that he was going to have this film in which he played everyone, I thought that is the most perfect description of the lyric poem that I've ever imagined, because who else is there? Of course, everyone in the poem, you're playing them because it's just you and the blank page. So, yeah. I mean, we have that idea that the speaker is a construct, but it was never so clear to me that everyone else is also a film in which I play everyone. In scene 2, silence is a sleeve. I'm an arm in it. In an outdated Hollywood magazine, I found a photo of someone wearing my hair. How can that be? Now I can't stop thinking about the synaptic sparks over which no one has any control. Or they have some control, but not enough to count on in a crisis. I'm making sense all the time of all the senseless endings. A day is as long as the time it takes for the mind to consider life and death countless times, which must make a day plus a night a highway we're only vaguely aware of, since we're busy sitting in a chair or lying on a bed with a floral print bedspread, or walking to the store past someone with a dog on a leash and a phone in their hand, into which they seem to be saying, this is not what I meant, blah, 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 to an absent ear. Home, you unpack the items you bought, crease the bags flat, stack them out of sight, all without saying a word. This is a non-speaking part. You're an extra. The day you were filmed on the steps, walking into the school dance, the costume you wore was pure you. The set for the scene where everyone disappears was painted Parisian sky blue. The air burned like a curtain on fire. The fire kept going out, then being relit, a trick candle on a cake made of clouds. A friend recently told me that she was reading the book and she was saying it's very dark. And it's like, yeah. And my friend Timothy Donnelly, who now I've mentioned 3 times, actually 4, when I was talking to B.K. Fisher, I mentioned him again, on a previous book, said, Mary Jo, these poems are really bleak. And I said, yes, Timothy, I am bleak. And he said, I know, but I keep thinking we must not say so. So this is the cheeriest poem. It's the last poem in the book. It's the cheeriest. I have written other cheery poems, not in this book. Once upon a time, that's all she said, then it's over. What did she know? She was a ghost-like apparitional memory. I'm sorry. She was a ghost-like apparitional sensory effect chattering in my ear about matters relevant only to me, like a therapist in a chair going on and on about last week's conundrum while you lie there, suspended in air, a levitation illusion, a pet shop sketch. For years, I'd said yes, but stopped before finishing defining what yes meant. Today I said, yes, I will say no. She nodded her head in agreement. Instantly, in front of me, a man, his hand raised. I admit I was afraid of the final cut across my mouth, my lips, flower petals folding in at the edge. Close your eyes, she said. I did. I saw the room I'd hidden in, the single window through which I used to look out at a moon that made the cold night appear as quaint as the pink feathery air after fireworks that drifted slowly over Tetris tile blankets laid out on a beach where the jigsaw interlock of sand grains mocked the ordinary imperfections inherent in any life. The deaths, past and present, in ashes, each discrete moment a memory palace waiting to be built alongside a suspended high wire antenna set to receive the unending message. This is what is meant by your one and only life. Yes, I consider that cheerful. It's a resignation, but that can be a form of cheer. I'm going to read some new poems. I'm working on a book of ekphrastic poems about art where there's a woman named Mary, and it's going to be called The Museum of Mary. And I began with poems about the Virgin, and that was going well enough, but I got tired of the Virgin, and so I branched out to other women named Mary. But I'll start with one about, it's the title poem, The Museum of Mary. And this is paired with a tattoo, Our Lady of Guadalupe, by Good Time Charlie Cartwright, 1997. The Museum of Mary. Why shouldn't I be a tattoo? The world needs another mother, while the father is busy closing his fist on a marble that's breaking along every fault line. Without me, there's so little meaning. When my son died, I said, let them make of me what they will. My blue mantle, my blue mind, the kind that used to say no more, then take steps to make it stop. I went on, and now I can't stop being whatever the world whimpers it wants. You know I'm Jewish, don't you? You act as if you'd like to forget that. I'm that something that keeps getting smaller and smaller until I'm no more than a 4-inch car ornament glued to the dashboard. My body last seen heading into a blizzard. One day I'm hammered wall art. The next I'm being spit on in a country that's lost its compass. My blonde hair is bleached, don't you know? The better to be more porcelain skin, more golden it girl, more pray for me, more queen of countless sorrows, more tomorrow will come like a kingdom. I have to read the poem that Rowan very kindly published in the New Republic, one of the first poems. Thank you, Rowan. Again, The Marriage of Mary. And this is paired with Wedding Procession of the Virgin by Giotto, 1305. The Marriage of Mary. I was too young to know anything about what I didn't know. And this is what you want for your daughters? To go along with the script and pay with their lives? I'm young, and my son was once older than I when I was, and he wasn't yet. He's gone and not gone. That's what myth does. It stops time to allow people to change into costumes with different colors and faces, each mask a girl with a different name, inconspicuously covered in fabric. And this is Becoming Mary, and it's paired with the Sistine Madonna by Raphael, 1513 to 1514, and it's a picture of the Virgin with Saint Barbara. Becoming Mary. I waited in the car. I looked at the brick and wondered why we were there. Why are we here if sorrowing is all we are made for? Later it happened to me, differently, of course. Each has their own way of being. Everyone's dead except me and Barbara. What I said, what I did, that too disappeared behind a curtain of twilight amnesia that was masking the blankness of fate, replicating a thread as the round head emerged. A child can be made to say whatever you tell her to say. I said no, but nobody listened. The cherubim are bored. This isn't their scene. Barbara and I are so done up. Makeup, hair, satin fabric. It feels like prom night. Just two more. This is the Gospel of Mary, which is actually, you'd think that was the Virgin, but the Gospel of Mary is associated with the penitent Magdalene. And this is a painting of her by Tintoretto, 1598. The Gospel of Mary. I was living a life that was more or less filled with misfiring synapses inside a brain case. They said and never stopped saying you are, that problem that can't be undone, a daughter that keeps becoming what keeps her mother awake. I was, in that moment, mother to myself. I was living a life filled with sky, gray to cobalt blue, the robe that wraps the day and keeps us together as long as it lasts. I was living inside my head, looking up, waiting to feel an awakening, but no angel came. The blue tablet under my tongue was melting. I was begging the sky for rapture, but all I could see was a break in the clouds. The only insight I had was what Horace said. I read it in a book. We are owed to death, we and whatever is ours. And this last poem is called Mary Jane, and it's paired with Mary Jane's Last Dance, the official music video, Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, 1993. And it's such a good music video. You really have to see it. I wish I could show it behind me. Mary Jane, each thought a puff of air until finally there it was, the atmosphere, as dense as a fogged-in city. Still, I saw the going upstairs on the face of the brick building opposite, the sun above the skyline, a bird making a beeline across a balcony. What I didn't see, standing next to me, was my future. After all that was left was an ember at the end of a roach clip. The blonde-haired boy from some Scandinavia of the mind began to stroke my arm as if I were a cat. I moved my arm, but he didn't stop. Some people think they can act on every odd idea that comes into their minds. I got up, closed the blinds, then sat back down again. He went back to petting me like a cat. I looked at my shoes. I heard the future say, someday you're going to have to learn to speak. Thank you. Now we're going to assume the thrones.
Okay, so now we're going to open it up to questions, and the poets are going to use the microphone so the people on Zoom can hear the answers. There you go.
Don't we need this for the question first? Am I asking a question?
Well, we can repeat the question. So
Oh, I see. So we have two of them.
I just have one. That's okay. Who wants to ask the first question? Go ahead.
Can you give us a little background on how you came to take on this new enterprise?
I can. Is this on? It never works. Okay. Okay. Many years ago, I have I'm drawn to eccentricity and the visual as well as language. And so that I have odd things like a headless cat puppet and things, oddities. And one day, a friend, the critic Marjorie Perloff, who just died, came to St. Louis, and she came to my apartment, and she walked in and she said, "Oh, I see, the Museum of Mary Jo." And I always thought that was amusing. And so more recently, I had a new friend, Nikki Hurd, who came to teach for us for 3 years. And Nikki came in and said, "Oh, I love all this stuff." And I told her the story of Marjorie. And she said, "Oh, you have to write a poem called The Museum of Mary Jo." And I thought, I don't know about that, but maybe the Museum of Mary. And so I had that in the back of my mind. And then during the pandemic, the St. Louis Art Museum closed for a while because of the COVID risk. And in lieu of being able to go, they sent every day an email with an object in the museum with a little, description of either the image or the artist, whatever. And so I was working on the translation of Paradiso, and at the end, the Virgin Mary plays a really big role. And so I was probably very interested in that. And I get through the email, this picture of the Virgin, and it was very weird. And so I became curious about some of the iconography in the painting and began to research it, just because I was curious. And the more I got into it, and learned I don't know why it occurred to me to write a poem. And so I wrote this poem, and then a week later or so, another image of the Virgin, equally weird. And so I researched that one, and now I had two. And it just occurred to me that this could be the Museum of Mary's or the Museum of Mary. And as I said, I now have branched out. So Mary Shelley, Mary Queen of Scots, all kinds of Marys. But thanks for asking.
A question for Rowan. About the title of your collection, I heard the word silver in several poems. I don't know if it's in every poem. And did silver take on different meanings for you as you went? Did you know it would be a theme beforehand, or did that evolve out of writing?
Okay, thanks for the question. So where does silver come from as a title for the collection? It's not in every poem, but it's I tend to consider books to be kind of concept albums, or kind of situations of temperament. Your temperament changes over time when you're working on things. Mary Jo was just telling you about this ekphrastic temperament that that she has at the moment. Silver for me is more kind of like the diastole and systole of the work. It's not a thematic, tautological thing. I never have, for instance, a titular poem. I don't have a single book where there's like the title of the poem. And for me, it's an opportunity to really work more like, when you go to a museum and you walk into different spaces, and there's a thematic sense, not just of the work, but it kind of occupies the air as well. Silver has many meanings that run through, I think, the ecosystem of the work. Silver is a dense metal. It is precious, but at the same time, it's rather commonplace at the same time. It has value to it, but at the same time, it signifies second place. I find it to be in terms of kind of like the value that we place on things. There's something both great and yet humble about it. Silver is also reflective metal, and I think that that's kind of where maybe you get the most sense of the word in the book. That silver is something where you can see yourself, or a version of yourself, but it's always slightly muddled. And I like that. I like the mercurial aspect of it, but it's really like most of my work. The idea is that it's more of a key signature, and it pops up when it pops up, but really in the sense of having this diastolic and systolic um, integrity to it. But I wouldn't put it in every poem. That would be a little too precious for me. Yeah, yeah, definitely. And I tend to not uh my imagination's pretty particular. So I don't have, my books or poems don't have parts in them. They don't have notes. And I think the idea behind it is that each work, each collection is an immersion, right? And you kind of get lost in it in the same way that whether you're staring at a silver plate or, a piece of silverware or what have you, that you just kind of are um, immersed in it, and you kind of see what you get. You see what you get out of it. While I was working on the collection, I think the idea was an untitled book in Chrome, right? I mean, that's kind of was my placeholder title for a while, that I was working on something that was just kind of like a study of a type of chromatic imagination. But like I said at the beginning, I'm a minimalist by heart, and so untitled book in Chrome um, became silver. So
I'm very struck by the music of your poems, and one thing that is unusual is your use of rhyme, used a lot.
well, thank you. Yeah, I write largely in my head. I actually don't like the idea of, like, once I have a line or something that comes to me, that I write it down immediately. There's something about kind of ossifying the intention behind it. A lot of people say, like, oh, when you have an idea, you have to write it down. But I actually very much like and far prefer to not write things down, because I feel as though if something is memorable, you remember it. And if you don't remember it, it wasn't that memorable. Um, so it takes me a while to get a poem down. They kind of exist in my head in different kind of conjugations. I also like, um, we're not getting big advances from our poems, but I like the risk involved in possibly forgetting a poem. You know, if poems have to have stakes in them in order to really sing, I think for me part of the stake is like just completely forgetting this great idea that I had and seeing if you can get it back. um Rhyme for me is sameness with a difference. I think that if we run from it, well, first of all, if anyone wants to run from anything in art, that's their right and pleasure, more power to them. But music is just completely interfused with rhyme. But rhyme mostly is a sameness with a difference, and I think that that's a great social allegory that we lose sight of sometimes when we just think of rhyme as something that old poems do, right? And this idea that we find pleasure and some type of semantic significance from things being the same and yet different. Cat and hat rhyme because they have a sameness but a difference, in the same way that, like, oranges and lozenges, or lounge chair and ladybug rhyme because they have a sameness and a difference. And I like sonic patterning. Among any definitions of poetry, the only one that really works for me is that poetry is something that sounds good, that you believe in. That sounds very simple, but I think it's very difficult to have something sound good and both at the same time have you believe in it. It's very easy to write things you believe in. It's difficult to make those things sound good, and it's really easy to write things that sound good that you don't necessarily believe in. And so the journey is to find that balance. Um, and in that kind of sonic similarity and braiding and all of that comes with it. There are a lot of forms that pop in and out of the books, but at the same time, I don't have notes, so I don't say this poem is in, rhyme royale or what have you, because something's happened in our teaching of poetry that just the announcement of certain things um, creates a type of hierarchy, right? Or you should know this aspect. And I think that the great thing about poetry is it should be completely anti-hierarchical. And so I just kind of write these things and hope for readers to kind of hear rhyme, or, see a form or not see it, and the values in the encounter and the experience. So.
Can you all talk about where you live and how that affects your work? You're from St. Louis, which is exciting to some of us, and How does that get into your poetry? And Rowan, you live in Barcelona some of the time. Fascinating. Can you talk about this place? When I first, I grew up in St. Louis, but a very different part of the city from where I now live. It was originally a semi-rural area, and then McDonnell Douglas, which is kind of like Boeing, built a plant, and they needed housing for all the workers and middle management, and so they made subdivisions with, you know, those modernist ranch houses, and then they built a school, and so instead of being bused to Ferguson to go to school, we had our own school in this area called Cool Valley, and like T.S. Eliot, I couldn't wait to leave. And I finally did. I moved to Chicago when I was maybe 22. And then I moved to Philadelphia. And then I came back to St. Louis. And then I moved back to Chicago. Then I moved to London. Then I moved back to Chicago. Then I moved to New York for 7 years. Then I got a job coincidentally in St. Louis. So I have very mixed feelings about St. Louis. But when I first moved back there from New York, and I loved New York and I never wanted to leave, I there's a large urban park that is actually 30% larger than Central Park and laid out by a disciple of Olmsted. So it's that kind of multi-use with, you know, wetlands, a forest area, a museum, all of these things. And I was running in the park and I stopped and I almost burst into tears and I thought, what is going on? And I thought, well, because this park is the museum of your childhood. And then I thought, well, then what's the art museum? It's like, well, that's the museum of your childhood. So I started writing these poems based on that children's book about the mixed up files of Mrs. Frank E. What is it? Something, Frankenthaler, where two kids get locked in the Met and have these adventures. So I imagined this conceit where I would be locked in the St. Louis Art Museum. I could only leave by entering a painting. And that was kind of my first experience with ekphrastic work. And so that would be the stage scene and the stage set. And that book turned into a book called The Eye Like a Strange Balloon, which are all ekphrastic paintings. So there have been moments where it meant a lot. And I think in general, what happens related to place is I get a lot of work done because I don't have the kind of life I would have in New York with a lot of different, you know, activities and friends and things like that. So it feels like a residency where I work and then I come back home to New York for 3 days and then I go back to the residency. So it's an odd relationship.
Red Seidel's from St. Louis, too, as it turns out. So New York, the first poem in my first book, The Ground, ends, "Love the place that welcomed you." I think it's just really important to have a sense of the place where you have your boots on the ground. I was born and raised in New York. I love the pressure of that because, I tell people, you want to know who the writers are from where you're from, wherever you're from. And boy, there are a lot, there are a lot from New York, and it puts a lot of pressure on you to claim a place, which I love because writing has tended to occupy that space. But I find I'm just a kind of incurable walker. I walk a lot. I think from my poems, you should get the sense that I walk a lot and I'm a stargazer. The Ground, my first book of poems, is often considered a post September 11th book. For me, it was more kind of what happens when you come back to New York after September 11th and you're used to staring at the skyline and the stars and how that's different. in this book, I have a poem in the back called Child of Nature, which I think does a better job of talking about my relationship to the city than I can right now. But basically, I consider New York to be, the center of the natural world. And, I find when you grow up in New York, particularly I grew up in the Bronx, people really rush to tell you it would be wonderful to like send you someplace else so you can find nature. Wouldn't it be great to go to Walden Pond? Wouldn't it be great to go to Yosemite? Well, we'll send you to the Green Mountains of Vermont. And it's kind of like this race to get you out. I imagine this happens to kids in East St. Louis as well. But my feeling was always that I'm in the middle of a natural wonderland. I've never considered where I am to not be nature. And I encourage everyone to feel that way. And I certainly write from that point of view, whether it's a street corner or being, on the 30th floor of a building somewhere or being in the middle of Central Park, that you're in the middle of an actual world. Barcelona, my wife is from Barcelona. We've been married for 20 years. We're both city kids. The great thing about that is you realize that to an extent, a city is a city is a city. All these places that you mentioned, Mary Jo, they're really different, but at the same time, a city is a city is a city. I think if anything from living abroad, I find is that I don't. There are very few italicized moments in my poems. I don't like. So, for instance, the idea is when you have another language to italicize it. I just kind of write through everything because languages that I have aren't italicized moments. They're all the same type of thing. And I love that cities tend to be, particularly big cities, London, Barcelona's not a big city, but Barcelona, New York, certainly, Los Angeles are these towns that were stitched together historically, right? And so it becomes this palimpsest. And I think about poetry in that same way, that, stanzas and these modes we work in, ekphrasis, pantoums, whatever, they were dances, or types of like songs or things like that. And so when we're putting together poems, we're kind of stitching together these counties, these communities. And certainly cities reflect that as well. So yeah. Perfectamente. I just said perfectly in Catalan. Yes. Yes.
For the Hudson Valley Writers Center students, for the most part, we have people here working on first collections, sometimes second collections, but first collections and chapbooks. And sometimes there are people who've gone on and done other things and have other careers, and they're coming back to writing right now. What suggestions or advice do you have for students working on their first collections?
Well, I think it depends on where you are in that process. I mean, if you have all the poems you want to keep together between two covers, then there are certain things like how to make those feel like they need to be together. If somebody is still writing poems for that, I might have different advice. That in terms of arranging a manuscript, the best advice I ever received, I have heard many different people give explanations of how they arrange poems. One was I throw all the poems on the floor, I gather them up, and that's the arrangement. Another was I give them to Ed Hirsch, and he does it. And he's always been fine. And I forget who was saying that. It might have been, what's his name, Gerald Stern, or someone else. But anyway, these things, you tuck them away. Lucy had this crazy system where she said, first you decide how many sections you're going to have. Then, and she said, and never more than 4. And it's like, why? Well, that's just fussy, she said. So then she would say, you want to pick your best poem. And it doesn't matter if it's not the New Yorker poem, she said, as if you're going to have a New Yorker poem. But you put that one first. And then your second best, that's the last poem. And then depending on those number of sections, you would like put the next one to bookend the first section, the next to bookend the last section. Then you know, make the other two sections, if you have four, bookend those. And then she said, it will be perfectly clear where all the poems go because you've defined those sections. And it's like, oh, that belongs with that. That belongs here. Okay. I mean, that's just so hard. I've tried doing it. But the best advice was given to me by Claudia Rankin. She saw a manuscript of mine, and she said, "Well, I really like the poems, but they're all in the wrong order." It's like, how would you know? Because I have no idea what order I've put them in. She said, well, you want to tell a story. So it doesn't matter if the reader knows the story, and it doesn't matter whether there was a story that generated the poems, but in your own mind, this happened, then this, then this. And that has turned out to be the best way of thinking that anyone has ever given me. Now, I do have to say that with this last book, I gave it to Timothy Donnelly and he arranged it.
Yeah, it's good to, I think it's good to remember in a similar vein that the Beatles never arranged their songs. They just gave them to George Martin and he put them how he wanted. So, you know, we presume a lot of intentionality when we listen to, you know, the White Album or Rubber Soul or what have you, but it was just George Martin kind of putting them as they were. I completely agree with certainly, most certainly the first thing you said, that it really depends, particularly in this day and age. Even when you talk about the advice you were getting from Lucy, the world has just changed so much now with the technocracy and how people kind of receive and send things. I will speak very briefly about some general things that are probably on your mind or that I hear often. I find a lot of people feel now that they have to find an agent. I want to stress to you that you do not need an agent to publish your poems. I actually even, with all respect due to the profession of agents, I think that the last thing that one should need is a poetry agent. What you need as you're going through your journey in poetry is a relationship with editors, right? You need to be able to send things and have some type of correspondence with the people who are putting things together and publishing things. And what an agent does is stand between them, and they're not going to know your work at all. So, you know, as the poetry editor for the New Republic, I receive a lot of queries from agents, and they are never the best representative of the work. You have to stand up and be accounted for. And honestly, if a venue only wants to deal with an agent when it comes to your poetry, it's not really a venue that you should be taking seriously, to be honest. Yes, I have an agent, but I have an agent for my prose, and my agent doesn't touch my poetry, and I like that type of relationship. Maybe it sounds like these are things that are easy for me to say, but I do stand by the fact that there's nothing like submitting your work yourself with some sense of like, I've read this magazine and the work that you do, and I feel very much akin, and so here's my work. Another thing, so in putting together manuscripts, I feel very much that you need to go with heat. You need to know what is hot in your work, and you need to start there. I think you need to presume. Bob Haas once said, you know, there was a time in the 70s, even into the 80s, when you could say, I'm going to sit down for the next 2 weeks and read all the collections that have come out. That's impossible to do at this point. It's absolutely impossible. And you should not presume that a reader will make it to your third page. You can't presume, oh, well, at the end, I'll have my second best poem. I'll save my second best poem for when they get to the end. You need to start really, 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 really hot, right? And certainly I agree. That's not where, you know, the most venerated magazine where said poem began, but just rather, it's not even a desert island question. It's like, what poems of yours produce heat and the most heat? Start there. You also then learn about yourself as a writer, because honestly, stack them and you start to see, okay, well, then this is where it feels like the heat is sputtering out. That might make you nervous because you're thinking, oh no, my first 6 poems are really hot and then they start to lose heat. What am I going to do? But then at least you know maybe these 6 poems are what I'm aspiring then to live up to, right? So I certainly, when I was working on my first collection, reached a moment where I said, okay, these are my best poems. I don't remember how many they were, but the goal after that was every other poem needed to be that good. It's as simple as that, right? And then you end up with a reader who is compelled by the heat of your work. But no one is going to stick around, for your magnificent sense of order. You have to compel them. This is why, for instance, when you talked about the sonic aspects of a poem, whether it's rhyme or something else, it's this compulsion that a reader has to keep going, to feel as though they're immersed. And you can only have this sense of, like, this is how I feel about this stuff. It's much like an allegory for it would be when you're in your own poem, right? You know how you get this poem idea in your head and you're like, oh man, I've got this awesome idea for a last line of a poem. I've got this killer last line. You've had that happen, right? It's like, oh, it's going to be an awesome last line. So you should never do that at all. Because if you come across a line and you say like, oh, this last line is awesome, I just have to write the rest of the poem, then you're basically saying, I've got this line. Now let me write these other lines that I know are not as good as this line, right? And some reader will be like, oh, well, these other lines aren't as good, but man, when I got to the end, was that great? No. If you have a line like that, where you're like, this compels me and this will be a great ending, it has to be your beginning, because that's where you start in art, right? I have this line, which has produced a great amount of heat in my imagination. Now I have to go from there. And it's fun. It feels scary and everything like that, but that's what the stakes are. And readers feel that. The last thing I'll just say is that please don't feel as though because you are debuting that it has to be a contest or it has to be a chapbook. Send your things to presses. You're not only at the will of first book competitions and competitions. Send them. Believe in the slush pile. Send them to presses, and just be various and multifoliate. It's a journey. It's a long journey. We're at this part of the journey that we're at now, and happy to meet you here. But it's a journey, and it's really one step at a time. But believe in poetry, and believe in the heat that you make. Writing itself is a biochemical reaction. This is biomechanics, right? But the heat that you make is something that's metaphysical and that no one can take from you. So that maybe you have the readers 4 months from now, maybe you have them 40 years from now. But we not only just lost Marjorie Perloff, we also just lost Helen Vendler. And one thing that Helen Vendler said that I believe is completely true is the poets of the future will decide, posterity will decide. But you believe in the heat, and let that be your testament to poetry, I think.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Rowan. Thank you, Mary Jo. Please buy books.